Okay, the camera had to focus.
Yeah. Okay.
We're in there now. Funny that camera goes off and then comes back on.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so Christians and protests. I guess
Mm-hmm.
that's since that's so much in the news. It's the protests. I mean, there's so much in the news nowadays. I think that's something that would be good for us to discuss as Christians. What's our involvement in
Mm-hmm.
these protests, especially when you're in a country and you see something that's on the surface unjust. Then how do you express your see it change? And then what about all the stuff behind it? When the big push comes, then what do you do as a
Mm-hmm.
Christian? And how wise is it to involve yourself in these things? And what part is your participation? So anyway, I think that's a kind of a good discussion for us
Right.
on these protests. So
Mm-hmm.
so I wanted to first show a scripture that I thought was really good is Matthew 22.
Okay.
Okay, 15. Okay, so it starts there and it says, then the Pharisees went and conspired together in order to trap him in his speech. So they
Mm-hmm.
sent their disciples to him together with the party followers of Herod, saying, Teacher, we know you are truthful and teach the way of God in truth, and you do not seek anyone's favor, and do not look upon the outward appearance of people. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay head tax to Caesar or not? But Jesus, knowing their wickedness, said, Why do you put me to the test, hypocrites? Show me a tax coin. They brought him a denarius. He said to them, Whose image and inscription is this? They said, Caesar's. Then he said to them, Pay back therefore Caesar's things to Caesar, but God's things to God.
Mm-hmm.
So what was interesting about this was the the tax situation in the Judean region and in Palestine was a cause for a lot of consternation and contention between the Jews and the Romans. So they were under a double tax system. Herod taxed them. Then you had the Romans that taxed them. So they were being taxed every which way. So that was a form of oppression, one
Right.
form of oppression that they were against. So they're trying to trap Jesus in his speech. Now it's kind of noteworthy that it would be the Pharisees and the party followers of Herod, since Herod was one of the dudes, one of the people who was heavily taxing the people. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so then so these guys come with the Pharisees, and Jesus said, you're hypocrites. See, I know what's behind what you're saying. So here's a
Mm-hmm.
simple answer. Pay back Caesar's things to Caesar and God's things to God. How would you, why would you come to me and ask that question when you guys are in favor of the tax?
Mm-hmm.
Especially the party followers of Herod. Your boss pushes that
Right.
tax. So, well, why would you then come to me on that?
Right.
So, yeah, Herod too was particularly, since that was his area, and the Romans allowed him to have such autonomy in his rulership. Herod was very brutal, and what he did was he sold the taxing arrangement to others. So, a person like Zacchaeus was a private businessman who had the tax contract.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's how it worked. The tax collectors, like Matthew and those tax collectors' offices, were private businesses. They weren't
Mm-hmm.
public businesses because Herod sold them the contracts
I
to
see.
collect the taxes. So yeah, they were overtaxing people, most definitely. I mean, they taxed everything. Yeah, even
Mm.
the fish you pull out the sea got taxed. so, so he
Okay.
was taxing everything. So the tax thing was very controversial, and so for them to come to Jesus to try to get something stirred up. Jesus
Mm-hmm.
said, you hypocrites, I know what's behind what you're doing. That was the point the reason why I wanted to read that scripture. Jesus said, hypocrite, nothing on the surface is what it appears. As a Christian, you have to look behind things.
Mm.
So we don't really get into don't allow our emotions to be tapped to where you get on the surface, and now you're moved, and you don't know what's really behind everything. Uh, Now here's an interesting thing too. Let's see. Okay, the in Matthew 5, I just use 5:1. It doesn't really matter, but the term, the Greek term disciple. Now,
Okay.
hang on one second. Let me just so I can read it because it's a lot better.
Okay.
But did you know that the term disciple is where we get the term math from?
Math.
Mathematics. Hmm.
Okay. No.
Hang on a second. I'll read this because this definition is very interesting.
Mm.
Okay, so the term disciple is math mathetes, and it says from math, the mental effort needed to think something through. Properly, a learner, a disciple, a follower of Christ who learns the doctrines of Scripture and the lifestyle they require. Someone catechizes a proper instruction from the Bible that is necessary with its necessary follow through. Life applications. So the term mathematics
Hmm.
is comes from the term disciple. So you got to have this mental effort to think things through. Not everything on the surface is so simple. You have to look beyond what's on the surface, think things through, and see what's there. So it may be something that you see on the surface that's unjust, but there may be more things to it. So you have to wait,
Hmm.
think it through, see what's going on, see if it's worthy of your protestation. And
Hmm.
then you got to think through how best to protest, depending on where you're at.
Okay.
So, and I think that the scriptures always they tell us that some stuff isn't it is what it is. You can't necessarily protest because it may go back further than you think. There was a scripture had remembered in Ecclesiastes. Just something to mention real quick. Let's see. Let me see if I can find it real quick. It
Okay.
was actually pretty good scripture, but I didn't remember. I read it. Matter of fact, I read it the other day, and I was like, man, I tried to make a mental note of where it was, but you know how it is with mental notes. You better put it on a piece of paper.
Right.
Yeah, and I didn't do that. But it was talking about when you see oppression.
Hmm. In Ecclesiastes.
Yeah.
Looks like it might be the beginning of chapter 4.
That's one. Yeah, but that wasn't it. But
Okay.
but this actually that's a good one because I did make a note of that just in my Bible, but it was a different one that talked about oppression just the same.
Okay.
Let's see. Yeah, no, it's in chapter 5.
All right.
What it does, it explains the depth. So look at chapter 5. Well, I'll tell you what. Since we got it, why don't we go with chapter 4? If you want to read that one, and I'll read the one in 5.
Okay. Um, well, there's a few verses here. It says, "Then I returned and considered all the oppression that is done under the sun. And look, the tears of the oppressed, but they have no comforter. On the side of their oppressors there is power, but they have no comfort. Therefore I praise the dead who are already dead, more than the living who are still alive. Yet better than both is he who has never existed, who has never seen the evil work that is done under the sun."
Okay. Yeah. See, so when you see oppression, sometimes you can't do anything about the power.
Yeah.
Okay. So That's the first thing, and then we'll come back to that. But check this out
Mm-hmm.
in chapter 5, verse 8. And wait, 8 and 9. Okay, so it says, if you see any oppression of the poor and a violation of justice and righteousness in your district, do not be surprised about the matter. For that high official is being watched by one who is higher than he is, and there are others who are still higher than them. Also, the profit of the land is divided among them all. Even the king is served by the field.
Mm-hmm.
So, if there's oppression of the poor, it can go all the way up to the top because people are making money off of it.
Right.
So, if you can adjust it, if it's possible to adjust it, then fine.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to realize that just because you feel a certain way doesn't mean it's going to change. And you got to see there's things behind it to keep it a certain way because it's profitable. So let me give you an example. The civil rights movement. Now, what a lot of folks don't know, and it's not part of the narrative, but it's absolutely true, was that prior to the civil rights movement and during the civil rights movement, a lot of the organizing and the payments to continue the civil rights movement were made by the Communist Party.
Mm-hmm.
So the Communist Party was even back in the 1920s and 30s was in the South organizing black sharecroppers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they were part of the organizing of them. So if the communists were there and the sharecroppers were looking to see that, hey, well, it looks like this is someone who's coming to help me. You know, they're speaking without an accent, just a regular American accent, not with a communist accent. A lot of blacks started to organize and then participate. So you had blacks, especially black men, who were going to Moscow, who were being trained as organizers. Uh, so the Communist Party was teaching them how to organize. And later on, some of them, and they still have their recordings, they were explaining this. And then they said they, of course, later renounced what they were doing because they saw that the communists were trying to enslave everybody. So they weren't really helping blacks out of any goodness or altruism. They were trying to organize blacks to go against the system so that the communists could eventually come in and take over. But they were using poor blacks to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the freedom rides, the buses that were carrying blacks and students to the South, driving them all over the South. But it was Communist Party was paying for those things, a lot of those. So now you see what's behind it. So you see, oh, well, civil rights. Yeah, that's great. But who was paying for it? What was behind it? And is that something that you want to participate in? There was one. And then there was one gentleman who was part of the civil rights movement in the 60s, and he left it. He said that they got a number of things accomplished that they felt they got accomplished, but the people who they were trying to accomplish it for never benefited, which was the poor blacks. So just like that scripture says, you know, that there you see oppression of the poor, and then you see oppression of poor and unrighteousness, when it goes higher. He made the point. He said that 60%, or no, excuse me, maybe it was 70% of the money that came from the civil rights movement, the federal money, to go and help the poor, 70% was going to the administrators.
Oh,
It wasn't going to the poor.
figures. Yeah.
See, so they felt that they accomplished something, but it wasn't benefiting the poor, who
Right.
they were trying to do this for. He was saying how there were companies, and what they were trying to do, the companies weren't hiring blacks. So what they were trying to do was get blacks in on the ground floor at the lower paying scales. And what that would do would get them in, and then they can increase. Well, the company was like, well, now we'll hire PhD type blacks. So then they were saying to those blacks that were PhDs, so because you only had to hire maybe 3 or 4 as opposed to hiring 20 janitors and laborers and stuff like that. So then
Yeah.
they were trying to tell those blacks, no, don't take those jobs. We're trying to get them to hire more blacks on this level. They're like, well, no, they ain't hire us because we were black. They hire us because we were qualified. They did not hire you because you were qualified. They hired you because you were black. So
Yeah.
let's see what we're trying to accomplish. But those black are, oh no, we're gonna take advantage of it. So anyway, the poor they were still being oppressed.
Yeah.
So you get involved in the civil rights movement. You don't see everything that's behind it. And then the results don't come as you expected. Even Martin Luther King said in an interview, he said that, my American dream, from I Have a Dream speech, he was piggying off that. He said it's turned to an American nightmare. They never publish. I mean, they don't put that speech out. No one learns about that speech or that interview where he said and basically he was saying the same thing as I think his man's name was Robert Woodson. He was saying the same thing. I get involved in this. I got used, and then it didn't turn out to be what I thought it was going to be. Yeah. So he was being tricked too.
I remember. I remember that too when Barack Obama was elected president. Everybody was talking about Dr. King's dream. It's been fulfilled.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, no, it hasn't, because Obama didn't get elected because of the content of his character.
Right.
He got elected because of the color of his skin.
Exactly. And that was very true.
Right. I mean, and most of the people I knew who were voting for him, a few of them actually said, I want to vote for the first black president. I want to be able to say that I did that,
Yeah.
So you're not really thinking about who he is or what he stands for.
Exactly. And then what you get in there and see, man, when he became president, a lot of stuff he did, you're like, oh, that's not appropriate. That's not benefiting the masses. No, he was very divisive, and he was more of a ruler than a president.
Yeah,
so he said, he's going to use the power of the pen. He wasn't going to work with Congress. He did it on his own. And then what he did was very partisan. I mean, extremely partisan. The way he conducted his administration. So yeah, those are examples.
Right. And they ended up giving him a bunch of powers that the president shouldn't have.
Mm-hmm.
And now Trump has those powers, and they're freaking out.
Right.
But you shouldn't have given anybody that.
So yeah, that's the thing. Again, when you look back as a Christian, being a disciple of Christ requires that you look beyond the surface of things. You have to look into the depth of it. Mm-hmm. It's mental effort. Yeah. You just can't jump into one thing or another. You really have to see everything through. So nowadays, with the protests that you look upon, you got to ask: Do I have all the facts? So there can be an emotional effect. Because even for me, I lived in St. Louis all my life. So even with Mike Brown's shooting, it wasn't just that they killed him, but it's that they left his body out there for 4 hours. So I understood what that meant. Now, I understood what they were doing. But does that mean then that I should go and join the protests? Well, there's more to it, though. So there's a lot more to it than just that. That's as the scriptures say. When there's oppression, it goes all the way up, and a lot of folks are benefiting. And to understand that, even when the Justice Department came in, there had been a lot of oppression of the poor in terms of in St. Louis. We have all these municipalities, and so the poor were the ones who were really getting mistreated by the traffic in municipalities. I mean, they were stopping everybody. And if you got one issue with your car on this one, you get a ticket. You go to the next municipality, they give you a ticket. So you're trying to get home, and you constantly getting tickets, and you can't pay the tickets. Now you got warrants, and then now you got to go. You get arrested when you get caught again. Now you got to pay the warrants. So I'm just saying, the oppression of the poor is just going to continue. It's not going to stop. You have to look long term. So when you see something like that, everyone was benefiting. And finally, the Justice Department put a cap on it, as much to say you can only get this amount of money from tickets.
That's when when we read Ecclesiastes 5, I know this setup, the way it's described, it made me think of feudal Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And because they had the peasants at the bottom and the lords over the peasants,
right?
And there were more lords over those lords until finally you got to the king. And it's interesting because you know what the Magna Carta was.
Yes.
Yeah, so they prop that up as being the first Bill of Rights or whatever, and where our Constitution comes from and whatever. And okay, that's fine, that's true. But the only people who that gave rights to was the nobles, because up until then, the king did what he wanted.
Okay.
Even to the nobles, and the nobles actually forced the king at sword point to sign that. That didn't help the peasants at all.
No, that's very true. That was the noblemen who were being heavily taxed,
right?
By the king. Yeah.
So it really only helped. Yeah. So it really only helped the people who had some money.
Yeah.
Once you didn't, Magna Carta, that was a Tuesday. That meant nothing.
Yes. So, I mean, that same thing has continued today. Jesus said the poor are always going to be with you. And if they're not, they'll complain when they want to as a group, but there's going to be a lot of injustice. So you have to see that. And then you have to get all the facts of everything. See, even like with this, the Breonna Taylor situation, man, there's a whole lot to that case, that they're not allowing the public to hear. And that's more of the media is not allowing the public to hear. So there's a whole lot with that. But then at the same time that she was killed, there was a killing of a white man under similar circumstances up in Maryland. And he was shot and killed while he was sleeping. And so the police up there were trying to cover it up, and not saying much, but the man was asleep. So his girlfriend got shot too, but she survived. He didn't. So it's like, well, why were you shooting in a house? You can't say that someone was shooting at you. Why were you shooting in the house?
Right.
Yeah, they were asleep. So she testified, no, there was no gun. Because the guy wasn't supposed to have a gun. Something like that. He was an ex-felon and whatever the case.
Okay.
But they're shooting into his home while he's sleeping and he gets killed. But there's no protest over that injustice. So again, you have to look at all factors, and that's what's the requirement. And so even though the media only putting out a certain amount of things, they have their narrative. But what does it, a Christian got to say, okay, well, let me stop and think before I go run out there and see, or is there more information to it? And you may just have to wait to see what's going on with that. So, and now just here, there's another scripture, which I think we know this one. This is Psalm 1. So this goes back to how things are done.
Psalm 1?
Yeah. Okay, so 1 through 3, it says, happy is the man who does not walk according to the advice of the wicked, and does not stand on the path of sinners, and does not sit in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of Jehovah, and he reads his law in an undertone day and night. He will be like the tree planted by streams of water, a tree that produces fruit in its season, and foliage of which does not wither, and everything he does will succeed. So again, that goes to me. That scripture goes back to who are you getting involved with. So, as I was saying before, the civil rights movement. Prior to the civil rights movement, you had the Communist Party organizing blacks. Now, this whole Black Lives Matter movement. There was an interview. I think it was an interview or discussion that was recorded between the two. One of the women from who started Black Lives Matter. Now, this young lady.
I remember you saying that.
Yeah. She came out and admitted that she's a trained organizer and a trained Marxist. So now, what's the difference in reality and in practice? What's the difference between communism and Marxism, and the communists organizing blacks, and the Marxists organizing blacks for this BLM movement nowadays? I mean, there's no difference, really, in my mind. I mean, there's no difference on what you're doing. And then what's their whole agenda? See, before we run out and support it, the interesting thing about that, I think they took this down off of their website. Their agenda really is to destroy the family.
Really? They say that?
Yeah, because they had mentioned something to the effect, I have to get the direct quote, but it's to break up the Western patriarchy, cisgendered family, with the
Yeah.
male head, that type of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
if you look at what has already been done and the effects of doing that to where they broke up the black family
Mm-hmm.
since uh, the end of the civil rights movement with the welfare. I mean, that just tells you right there. So
Yeah.
me as a husband and father, especially a black husband and father, do I want to participate with a group whose aim is to destroy the family? They're
Mm-hmm.
trying to create their own setting of what a family should be, which is more communal as opposed to individual.
Right.
And with a family unity, a husband, a wife, and the children. But they want to destroy that.
Yeah.
So why would I participate in anything that they have? That makes no sense. Why would I allow my children to participate? I mean, my children are too young anyway. But why would I allow my children to participate in anything that they have when their actual aim is not a Black Life Mattering? It's like they don't want, and they talked about this too. They don't want black men involved. They want to destroy the family. So only good black man to them is the dead one. And then they come running in. Oh, injustice to blacks. But their whole thing, their whole premise is the destruction of the family and the upbuilding of the other genders, not the family structure. They want to break
Other
that down.
genders.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
So what would you be getting involved in? See, there it is in verse 1. It says, happy is the man who does not walk according to the advice of the wicked, does not stand in the path of sinners, and does not sit in the seat of scoffers. I mean, it's right
Right.
there. Why would I participate or stand or sit or walk with anyone who wants to destroy my family?
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't agree with that. So you can call it cisgendered or whatever they want to call it, patriarchy or whatever they want to call it. The family is the family. And for the especially for me, for the black community, no, I think it's got to be the strong family
Mm-hmm.
to which you can build a community. I mean, it's down to what? It's only 28% of us that are married anyway, black men. It's
Yeah.
just gotten to that point, married with children.
Right.
Yeah.
Uh, and I know a few people who are socialists, or some of them will actually say they're communist.
Mm.
And it's interesting how they think, because they want to cherry pick all the good stuff out of communism, or all the theoretical good stuff, because I don't know of any good stuff that's actually come from it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, certain social programs, and then, well, the police are a social program. Okay, but, when you start talking about Stalin or Mao with them, they're like, oh, I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
But that was communism.
Mm-hmm.
You can say you're against fascists, and okay, nobody calls Stalin or Mao a fascist in the history books, but when you look at their practices, it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
If we stop calling it something, it looks the same as Mussolini or Hitler.
Right. Right. Because that whole socialist mentality
Mm-hmm.
was really happening a lot back in the 1930s, and I'm just kind of amazed that everything that came off of the Marxist principles.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really amazed at how that spread as quickly as it did, and then it turns into what it turned into. Failures basically the whole way around, and all of them it turns into a failure. But now people want to revive it, but that makes no
Yeah.
sense.
Well, I think if you look at the Industrial Revolution, at which time Karl Marx was writing, um, people started to feel oppressed because of the
Mm-hmm.
ways factories and other such businesses were going.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they didn't have the virtue or the education from the Bible to understand why these things are happening. And so, and even if they did, well, that may not help you if you're getting 2 cents an hour
Yeah.
and going home to your little shack. So, and you see the Carnegies and the Rockefellers and all those guys living in big houses. So yeah, you're like, well, I want that.
Yeah.
And maybe Marxism seems to present where you're actually the most important and you should be getting all the wealth. So yeah, I could see where that happens.
Okay.
But like you said, with a thorough examination, they should see, okay, no, this isn't going to work, because it doesn't.
Yeah. Yes. And see, then with there are certain things that as Christians you can involve yourself in. I mean, I haven't researched the full history, but I think the unionizing was what built up a middle class and kept it from being like the extreme poor and the extreme wealthy, which was where
Yeah.
they were heading. Because the extremely wealthy had the influence of government,
Hmm.
or the ability to influence the government.
Right. Yeah, they did.
So, but the poor didn't. So there was a level of oppression, but then the ability to unionize and demand a higher wage for what you're doing, I thought that was a good thing.
Yeah.
Now I don't know all the depth behind it, but yet that was a good thing. It built a middle class. Now, and even then, you had now a stronger tax base since they had
Hmm.
started taxing income prior to the ability to unionize, the legalization of unions. So they had the
Hmm.
ability to they couldn't oppress to an extreme degree, and they had the ability to unionize. Now they had a tax base. People were making more money. They could, of course, then tax their income more.
Right.
So that did work uh, in one vein. So would it be good to participate in that as a Christian? Well, if you can see an outcome and what level your participation will be, because you still have to have, or your conduct still has to be according to what Christ says. And if the
Yeah.
unions even are asking you, well, no, you got to do some things like break some stuff and do all this. It's not just carrying your placards. And then you got to ask yourself, are you really going to do that? And is that something that Christ would approve of?
Hmm.
So, I, so much has, I think, so much has been stripped away from Christianity and the ability for people to understand that your relationship with God is through Christ and no other entity. And so, therefore, that communication has to be through you and Christ, and that's it. No other entity.
Right.
You can get some advice from folks, but in the end, as a disciple, you have to have the mental capacity to think these things through, pray about them, and then see what's your blessing is going to be. What's the effect?
I would say too about unions that not only just the protesting part, but just the everyday workday,
Mm-hmm.
that the union worker should keep in mind, I'm in a union so I can keep getting paid to work hard,
Mm-hmm.
not so I don't have to work hard anymore for my money.
Right. Right.
Because a lot of them just don't do anything. And they're like, what are you going to do? I'm in the union.
Mm-hmm. And that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. So, everything has their own issues when they come out, but the level to which you want to be at in your participation with those issues, and
Right.
like they would come in and they would sit when there were strikes. They would come in and sit at the plant or wherever it was and block scabs from working. Okay, well, they
Hmm.
found you can't do that. If you're not going to work, you can't block it. So they're going to hire other folks to do it that are non-union. They're going to do that.
Right.
But the fighting and the beatings, the vandalism and stuff like that. Yeah, well, I don't think that Christ would approve of that. That's me personally. He would approve
Right.
of me doing something like that if I was in the union. But you can see if you got the ability to unionize and you feel it's going to be good for you, then you can participate in that. That
Hmm.
that type of protest. But again, that's a personal decision, and that's between you and Christ.
Right.
Yeah, like I said, the challenge to think things through is what's to me is what's the difficulty. So someone gets shot by the police, and then you go run out there on the person. You go run out to protest.
Hmm.
Okay, because that type of protesting, it I think at some level, especially when you start breaking things up, can prove you know to be seditious. You really got to ask yourself that question. But then here's the other thing I guess we have to think about is that person gets killed by the police.
Hmm.
Now you got this wave of emotion. What does it really change by going out there and protesting? That would be my
Hmm.
question. The police are a local matter. It's not a federal matter. It's always local. So
Sure.
have you changed the police and their rules in a country where you can do that? Because you can organize, you can go and say, okay, well, let's get the community together, and we want these changes on the police, with the police union, all that other kind of stuff. We
Right.
want, it may have to go to a state type of thing. Okay, we want these changes. Okay,
Right.
what then you can actually affect change.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't do that and you're just in the street breaking things or just protesting, it doesn't change anything. It doesn't move people to change, because you have to change laws to change the culture.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, that is just from my personal opinion. That's how I see it.
Right.
So if a Christian can say, okay, well, wait a minute, like I take here in Florissant, the Florissant Police Department. Now, even though I'm in unincorporated Florissant, but just the Florissant Incorporated Police,
Mm-hmm.
they pull over black non-residents at a 4-to-1 ratio of white non-residents. I think it was 4-to-1. So
Okay. Really?
yeah, so why are
Yeah.
you pulling them over more? And so to me, that would be an injustice when even your citizens, your residents, you pull over at like a 3-to-1 ratio of your white residents. So why are
Hmm.
you pulling them over? And so, but here's the thing: the attorney general puts this stuff out every year. You can get this stuff every year to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Then the question comes: do you really want to change it? So you can yell about it, or you may not even know about it because you don't look to see what's going on in your own community.
Right.
So I think that's an injustice there. But then, do you really want that changed? An explanation be given as to why you, if it's just for the citizens, the residents of your city. Why do you pull the black ones over more than you pull the white ones when the blacks are about a quarter of your residents? I think it was a quarter, 28%, so around a quarter.
Sounds about right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so then that's a question that has to be asked.
Hmm.
But if no one's asking the question, then do you really want to change? See,
Hmm.
now here's the other scripture that I think about: Proverbs 1.
Okay.
Okay, so like I'll start here at verse 20. It says, "True wisdom cries aloud in the streets. It keeps raising its voice in the public squares. At the corner of the busy streets, it calls out. At the entrances of the city gates, it says, how long will you inexperienced ones love and experience? How long will you ridiculers take pleasure in ridicule? And how long will you foolish ones hate knowledge? Respond to my reproof, then I will pour out my spirit for you. I will make my words known to you. Because I called out, but you kept refusing. I stretched out my hand, but no one was paying attention. You kept neglecting all my advice and rejecting my reproof. I also will laugh when disaster strikes you. I will mock you when what you dread comes. When what you dread comes like a storm, and your disaster arrives like a storm wind, when distress and trouble come upon you, at that time they will keep calling me, but I will not answer. They will eagerly look for me, but they will not find me, because they hated knowledge, and they did not choose the fear of the Lord. They kept refusing my advice. They kept disrespecting all my reproof. So they will bear the consequences of their way, and they will be glutted with their own counsel. For the waywardness of the inexperienced will kill them, and the complacency of the fools will destroy them. But the one listening to me will dwell in security and be understood by the dread of calamity, or undisturbed, excuse me, by the dread of calamity. Okay, so that was kind of long, but here it is. We live in an information age. Man, it is possible to get just about anything from your chair in your living room on the internet.
Yeah. Yes, it
So
is.
if you see something is wrong, or if you're affected by something is wrong, or there's a group that's affected by something was wrong, and the information is there and you do nothing about it, then how is it then that you want to blame racism or you want to protest or break things when it's there and you did nothing about it. You didn't make the effort when you could. Just because you may feel hopeless does not necessarily mean that you are hopeless. It's just that no, you have to learn that there are ways that you can do things.
True.
So
Yeah.
so you may have to go and start knocking on doors, do some retail politics. Say, hey, look, this is what happened to me. I want to put this out and I want to talk to my neighbors about it to see if this is something you agree with because we have this. This is the way we can go and change things. Yeah, they try to hide it. Okay, they try to hide how you can change it, but no, I can go change it. Here's how we can change it, but we got to do it as a group.
Mm-hmm.
See, so
Yeah. I
that's
think
I like. Hmm.
when Ecclesiastes talks about the chain of power, I think that it's important to, like you said, locally, get the people who are going to be on your side into office.
Hmm.
Not so much like the president. People think about the president like
Yeah.
that's important, but you can't talk to the president.
Right.
You can talk to your council person or your mayor, and you can possibly get them on your side.
Right.
And then once you've done that, or if they're not on your side, get somebody in who is, if at all possible.
Hmm.
Once you've got that going, then you can start moving up.
Yeah.
And like was said about the poor and the lords and all that. I mean, in feudal times, there were probably some compassionate lords, but what could they do? This is the
Exactly.
system.
Yep.
Same thing with like slave owners during the antebellum times. There were some compassionate slave owners, but what could they do? This is the system.
Hmm. Yeah. So there was more. I think the thing to keep in mind that there's more to things than just a narrative. So
Yeah.
that's the term they use. They put out a story, and then everyone has to follow the story. And it's like, well, no, that's not for a Christian.
Hmm.
A Christian has to look beyond the surface. That's a requirement before you make a decision, especially if something of this level of importance that may have a large effect on your life. You just really got to think about it. Okay, well, is this something I want to be involved in, or is it something I want to be involved in, but in a different way? Yeah,
Hmm.
I agree that was wrong, and I agree that this practice is wrong. But let me get more information before I go and just jump into a protest. Because you kind of
And
see what they're doing now. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
right. And in my experience, the public narrative is often very flimsy.
Yes.
It falls apart if you just look at it even slightly
Mm-hmm.
and ask a question. Well, why is this like this? And they don't have an answer.
Right.
But it doesn't matter because everybody else is going to go along with it.
I was watching the news and it was I can't remember which city it was. I want to say Minneapolis. Maybe it wasn't Minneapolis. It was another city, Portland or one of them. But what was happening? They had trucks dropping off bricks at
Okay.
a certain spot, and so what it was for the protesters to go and get the bricks.
Oh, really?
Okay, yeah,
Wow.
and then so it wasn't just you had the people who were protesting.
Yeah.
Then you had the second wave of people coming behind with the bricks. And now that they done busted out all the windows and everything in the businesses, now you had the third wave of people coming behind and they would, vandalize and steal and stuff.
Hmm.
So this stuff is planned.
And then come the construction crews. Yeah.
Yeah,
So they can
exactly.
rebuild
They can
everything
rebuild it. Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm.
at a very high cost, I'm sure.
Yes, exactly. And which was interesting that they had that plan in St. Louis for the corridor of West Florissant from
Ah,
270
yeah.
down to Lucas and Hunt. I want to say it was down to Jenny Station Road. Maybe it was Jenny Station Road. They had a plan
Hmm.
for the rebuilding of that. And one of the issues, which again was surprising to me, one of the issues in there that could affect the plan was civil unrest. And when I read that, I was like, before Mike Brown, what sort of civil unrest was there? So then my question was, are they planning for civil unrest?
Mm.
So they're waiting for an event, and then they're going to organize, and then uh, get everything burned down, tore up, whatever the case may be, and then these companies come in, and the insurance is paid, and they come in and rebuild, and it's really in a large way it could be some taxpayer money in that,
Hmm.
or it could be just people, the businesses now have taken over because the land was sold. The and it was sold at an inexpensive price because the insurance had already paid the money.
Yeah.
So
It could be too that they recognize that, well, they knew that some people might recognize it as gentrification,
hmm
and that might lead to civil unrest. But if they engineer their own civil unrest, then nobody's going to complain when they rebuild it, because of
right,
course they're rebuilding it.
right, and then at the same time, it's like, okay, well, it looks like these companies are being altruistic when they come and do it. Oh yes, this was
Mm.
terrible what was done. Let us come in and you know and put these things in the area. Now,
Right.
do you really have the poor that's there have the mentality to take advantage of these things? I mean, and you just stop and think about it. I think Ferguson alone, that city was 60% black, but blacks weren't dominating the politics there. Well, why is that? If you got a majority black population, why didn't, and they were concerned about the way things were doing, why weren't the blacks dominating politics? See, so no one was involved.
Right.
That was the thing. They weren't involved, and a lot of citizens were transient. They move into apartments. Weren't homeowners, property owners, and then they'd move out, and then someone else come take their place. So it always maintained that type of racial balance. But that didn't mean
Yeah.
they took over things and say, no, we need to make things more just or whatever the case may be.
Right.
So
Yeah.
anyway, that's those are things where you got to look beyond the surface. That's all. We have to look beyond the surface before we jump into something and see if it's even
Yep.
worth our time and effort in the way it's being presented, or if there's something that we do want to become involved in, then how? How do we want to do it? And
Right.
I want to be involved this way. This is how I want to do it, and that should work for me. I think we can get some real change. And then putting people in office, you don't put them in there because of their skin color. You put them in there because you feel they're going to do something. You know, they promised you we're going to do something about this. Here's how we're going to go about doing it.
Hmm.
And if you put me in office, this is how I'm going to do it. Okay, all right, I'll vote for you. You know, the community will organize around that.
Right.
But just put them in because they're black. That doesn't mean nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. That is what happens a lot of the time. That's
Mm-hmm.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because you look at putting people in just because they're black. Look at Detroit under Kwame Kilpatrick and what they were doing.
Hmm.
So you know that doesn't mean anything just because they're black. You got to
Right.
put in people who are going to give you the change that you expect. See, so we talked about voting before, and if you have the freedom as a Christian to vote, then do you vote? Well, I don't think Christ opposes that, but you know you have to use your power wisely, you know, for your best
Hmm.
interest. So,
Right.
so yeah,
Yeah. Exactly.
that's what I mean. I don't know if you had anything else on that, but that's what I thought about the protest. There's plenty of scriptures around that give us an idea of how to look at things,
Hmm.
and you may want certain things to change, but we can't be swept along by whatever is put out for the public consumption and the things that are not put out. But I
Hmm.
mean, it's there, let me say it. It's there. It's just not put out in completely for you to see it. Like, oh no, there was definitely more to it. You know.
Right. Yeah, and when you consider that the average adult in the United States reads at like a sixth grade level, I think they
Mm,
said,
mm-hmm.
so they don't really have the functions to find these things out, because you have to look beyond just the couple paragraphs they write in the newspaper
Mm-hmm.
to really
Oh,
understand.
yeah, yeah. Well, here's the thing though, is just like with the Breonna Taylor thing, for example. There was a person. Well, I think the police had released a lot of their evidence.
Hmm.
Okay, they had released it as to why they were looking at her, and it goes back. They had been looking at her for like 4 years. So because of her participation with a drug dealer, you know, she was in a relationship with one,
Oh.
and see, it goes back to she had rented a car for this guy, and then there was a well, it was something to the extent where there was another guy was killed while in the car, and he had the car or something like that. Anyway, there was a dead body in the car that she had rented
Oh,
for this drug
jeez.
dealer.
Yeah.
See, so but you're going back 4 years,
Well,
and so
okay. Yeah.
so he and she was participating with him in the drug dealing that he was doing.
Hmm.
So apparently, from what I gathered, the day of the day that they had raided her place, they also raided his other drug spots because he was using her address for packages, for deliveries and stuff like that, and for mail. So they raided her place at the same time that they raided these other places. So I don't know the extent of that raid, but I'm just saying
Hmm.
she was look the lifestyle that she was involved with, the people that she was involved with, drew her into something.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's yeah. You're
that
hanging
there
out with
was
drug dealers and dead bodies. You can
right,
expect to get shot.
yeah, yeah. Well,
Right.
you in that lifestyle.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so now here's the thing: is you're still connected with this guy. You haven't broken your connection with him, and now you got a new boyfriend. Now, from what I haven't done a whole lot of research into that just to verify. But then there was one thing that was saying originally he said that she shot at the police, not him.
Hmm.
Then he came back and said, no, it was me who shot. So it's a bit confusing.
Hmm.
But therein again is to what extent do you go and protest, or do you say, well, wait a minute, this was her lifestyle? Oh no, I'm not getting in
Right.
anywhere near that.
Right.
Was it
Exactly.
was it sad that she was shot and killed? It was by the police. It was, but it was also sad that the other guy up in Maryland around the same time was shot and killed by the police
Hmm.
while he was sleeping. So again, that's two things, but no one's protesting over that situation. So why are they protesting over this situation?
You know what you said too about Obama earlier. I'm thinking a lot of times I hear people talk about things Trump says. Which to me it's more important what he does than what he says.
Mm-hmm.
But I never hear anybody talk about things Obama said. And I can remember, and I think because Obama had a way of keeping it more subtle,
Mm-hmm.
but I can remember hearing some things, and it was actually him saying it, quotes, sound clips of him saying it. And I thought, oh, that's not right.
Oh yeah,
Like,
he got passes all the time.
when, when North Korea erased all those emails from Sony or whatever they did,
Mm-hmm.
and he called that the biggest, not the biggest cyber attack, the biggest terrorist attack of the United States of all time.
Okay.
And this was 10 years after 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody was killed when North Korea erased some emails.
Right.
But then also that attack on that club, which we know that guy was not homophobic. He was in fact a regular of that club. You know
Mm-hmm.
the one I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah. In Florida.
Obama said that was the biggest massacre on U.S. soil ever. I think he forgot about Wounded Knee. Or
Mm.
maybe it doesn't count as a massacre when the United States Army does it.
Right. Yeah. And even again, they there was a narrative. It was shaped, and he jumped in it,
Right.
and now we're supposed to be
He
emotional
was good
about it.
for that. Right.
Yeah.
He was good for that.
Yeah. See, so those are things. Again, like I said, they put out a story, and a Christian got to do better than jumping on that.
Right. And
He has
that's
to.
what I'm saying is
Yeah.
sometimes even you just hear the story and think, no, that doesn't sound right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You got to
And
wait
even
till
with
everything
just,
comes out. Yeah.
yeah, and even with just a little bit of checking.
Yeah.
Because I actually had to look and see were more people killed at Wounded Knee? Well, yeah, they were. I had to look that up, but
Mm-hmm.
it is true. Plus, I had to be aware of Wounded Knee to think about that in the first place.
Right. Yeah. So there's. I like this. The thing about wisdom. Wisdom would tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Wisdom is calling out. So before we run off as Christians with anything, speak about it, a number of things. Just wait and see. Well, what does God require of a Christian? Well, let me ask some questions. Sometimes you don't even know what questions to ask, but sometimes it just doesn't sound right. You know,
Right. True.
so and sometimes history will tell you, well, no, look into things because this was done before or whatever the case. But when we don't make that effort, we call ourselves a Christian, don't make that effort, then I think then God has an issue then, and we go run off on emotion, which is not what Jesus did. Jesus looked, well, of course, he was the Son of God, so he knew a lot of issues, and he knew the depth of the issues, and he was up on them, and so he knew how to handle himself. That's why he said, before, no, we're not going to fight. My servants aren't going to fight to keep me out of the hands of the Jews. I know. how things
Right.
really are. But
And he
yeah,
had
look.
the full scope. He knew the
Mm-hmm.
full scope of the Roman Empire,
Mm-hmm.
and he understood exactly how it was affecting everybody, but still said, basically, it's not worth it.
Right. Exactly. And look, when Satan offered it to him, and said, you can set this up how you want to. He
Yeah.
said, no, I'm good. No, the worship goes to God. I don't need that.
Hmm.
So, okay. Anyway, that's what I have for today.
Okay.
Yeah, that was
Yeah, I might have some things to say off the mic, but
okay.
later. I'll see you later.
Yep, sure will.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll see you
Thanks.
then. Bye.
Bye.